Hi, and welcome to this session on privacy in society. The way we thought about organizing this session is that there is Rick, who will talk to you about the right to privacy as a human right, and I will talk about how we arrived at this right to privacy as a human right. So that's the title of our session, From Potential Social Threat to Human Rights. Now, without further ado, let's open the curtain. We start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the reason why we start with this declaration is that for the first time in history, we have at Article 12 the right to privacy clearly mentioned. Now, as Rike will explain to you, the Universal Declaration is not legally binding. So instead, we have European, regional, national declarations of rights which protect the right to privacy. And let's look at the European Convention on Human Rights. In Article 8, it states not the right to privacy, but the right to private life. And the reason why I mention this article is that it has two parts. And the first part is the right to private life, which consider the right as a quality. And the second part is the state which can impinge on this quality. So we have on the one hand the right to privacy as a quality for individual, and on the other hand the right to privacy as a threat for the state. So the right to privacy is understood in this way as a relationship of power between the individual and the state. Now, this is our working method at the Center for Privacy Studies as decided by Mette. So what I suggest is to look at the history of the right to privacy from this perspective as the history of how the concept of, on the one hand, the individual and on the other hand, the state developed in European history. Now, the individual has power and the state has power, and this is a history of the power play between the two. The power of the individual, we can call it liberty, and the power of the state, we call it authority. Now, there is a book from Cesare Ripa, which is a classical iconology that shows liberty as a young woman. She's standing because she's full of life, she can go anywhere. And in her right hand, she has a scepter, which symbolizes power, because when you're free, you have power over yourself. In her left hand, she has a hat, which symbolizes the hat that was given to slaves when they were freed in Roman time. And then at her feet, maybe you notice there is a little cat, because it is well known, cats do as they them please. Kitty. Authority in the same book is shown as an older woman, because age shows experience. Sitting, because sitting shows insurance in your authority. And you can see that in her right hand she has keys, symbolizing the key to heaven, and holding them high because all power comes from God. In her left hand, she has a scepter, because again, scepter is authority, power over others. And you will notice also that she has at her feet some books. Books represent authority of scriptures. Now, this relation of authority and liberty throughout European history can be translated into law. So power in law is translated as obligations and duties. You have power over someone else when this someone else has obligation towards you, or you have duties towards someone else, which someone else has power over you. So this is translated as, for the individual, the right over someone else. And the individual then has a right to liberty. For the state, on the other hand, it is about sovereignty. In Latin, imperium. Now, this struggle between liberty and authority is a struggle also for the definition of sovereignty, which can be understood if liberty trumps over authority as popular sovereignty, or if authority trumps over over liberty as monarchical sovereignty. And this is very important in history because it shows two different types of government. On the one hand, if individuals have popular sovereignty, then you have a republic, and the individual is considered as a citizen. On the other hand, if it is monarchical sovereignty, then we live in a kingdom where there is only a king which has authority, and the individual in this kingdom is a subject. And you have two very different conceptions of how much rights the individual has in such a state. Now, I want to show you a very, very broad timeline over what I think arbitrarily from my own authority are the main important events and figures for this development of the conception of the individual and the state. So we start with antiquity. And the first figure is Aristotle. Aristotle with a book called Politica, where he explains the conception of citizen and the relationship of the citizen with the police. Another figure is Cicero, and we're now in Roman times. And these two figures talk both of the concept of organization of society, and they are widely discussed afterwards. Another very important figure of antiquity is Jesus Christ. He did not write the Old and the New Testament, but these are the Holy Scriptures and have been, of course, highly influential towards European history. In the Middle Ages, one of the last Roman emperor called Justinian I decided that it would be a very good idea to collect all the Roman laws into one book. And this collection was called Corpus Juris Civilis and was widely read in universities. So Roman law was the framework for understanding law in all European countries. And in this fight between liberty and authority, you have a fight, for instance, between the authority of the king and the liberty of the nobles, barons, which resulted in the first Declaration of Rights, the Magna Carta Libertatum, the Great Chart of Liberties granted towards barons in 1215. With the Renaissance, we have this rediscovery of classical writings, and Machiavelli is considered as the sort of guide throughout these readings. You may know him from The Prince, but he also wrote another book called The Discourse of the First Decade of Titus Livius. Another major figure of the Renaissance is Martin Luther, whose thesis prompted separation from the state because the church didn't want to reform, and he called for reformation of the church. And Europe was separated between the Catholics and the Protestants, which led to the bloodiest war in European history at that point, ended with the Peace of Westphalia. Now, this war led many thinkers and intellectual figures to consider rights and the importance of protecting individuals from the power of the states. And one of these figures is Grotius. He was Dutch, Hugo de Groot. This is the Latin word, the Latinization of his name. And he came with the idea of natural rights, which were then widely discussed throughout the Enlightenment. A very important person is Hobbes, who discussed the idea of a natural states in which we have natural rights, and there's a contract, a social contract, in which we come to the present state, in which it is discussed what we do with these rights. Also importantly, he discussed the idea of the state for the first time as an external entity. Now, this led to many revolutions, the first being in England, the Glorious Revolution, which led to the 1689 Bill of Rights. Another one is, of course, the American wars and the Declaration of Independence, which led to also many Declaration of Rights. The French Revolution, maybe the major point in European history at that time, with the Universal Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Now comes modernity and the consolidation of the states, new technologies, and there is an article that was published in the US Harvard Law Review by Warren Brandeis, which we will see more in detail, that for the first time called the right to privacy on top of the existing previous rights. And then this right to privacy was included as a human rights in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now let's go more in detail into all these periods, if you will. So we start with antiquity. Well, it's late antiquity and it's Greece, and as I mentioned, Aristotle. So he gave several lectures which were noted down in some papyri, as you can see here an example, called Politica. Now, Politica in Greek meant things concerning the polis, the city. Now, the question is, how do you translate polis? And it's been translated city-state by many people, and it's wrong. A polis is literally a multitude of citizens who are sovereign. It is not the state, which is a modern concept, as we will see that we have from Hobbes. So if you think of the state today, this is your Hobbesian concept. And it's definitely not a small nation state. No, it's a political partnership or civil community. Literally, the state, the polis at the time is the assembly of citizens. And at the time, of course, they were old men, rich. And for Aristotle, citizenship, being a citizen, is the only way to reach your true nature as a human being. So you are what he calls a zoon political, a political animal, because you can only become happy and develop yourself in a social setting in the polis. Another important idea that he discussed is the different type of polis, of government in the polis, which are kingship on the one hand, aristocracy, and what he calls politeia. These are the three ideal types, and they can degenerate into really bad types.